So I actually helped found the company. I was working as an educator. I was a teacher for elementary school. My master's in education dissertation was about uh, how to incorporate games and play into the education process to help kids more effectively learn. So I started by designing board games for kids for math and social studies primarily. And then about, I don't know, 8 years later, when I was playing board games with my group of friends, one of my friends said, "Hey, I would love to show you this concept I did for a zombie apocalypse board game, and I'd love your feedback." And I gave it to him, and it wasn't kind, but it was accurate. Um, so, so afterwards, he was a little sad about that, and he said, that was tough to hear, but I know I can do better. And I said, "Of course you can do better. You're very smart. You're an engineer. You fix things. That's what you do." He said, "Great. If I do that, will you do that again and play it again and give me that kind of feedback?" And I said, "Sure." And about a year and a half later, we had the apocalypse. So that was our first Greenbrier Games game, and it's been downhill ever since. No,
Really, you can't say downhill. I mean, you guys
I
have
can't. I cannot say that. Oh goodness
you guys
gracious.
what broken 1,000% already in your campaign for this latest expansion was Fall of the Spire.
Correct.
So
Correct.
yeah, I mean that's amazing.
Thank you.
But the real reason why we're here today is actually to talk about words and wordsmithing and the importance of them in your rule books as well as your Kickstarter campaign. So we're going to start off with the rule book. When you are developing a rule book from a designer, how do you take those incoherent words that they use typically and form it into something that people can understand easily? Because that tends to be a lot of big problems on newer campaigns.
Well, not even newer campaigns. It's a challenge whenever you let the designer take the lead on writing a rulebook themselves, and we've had that struggle as well. So even companies that are more established, sometimes that is a problem, and that's hard. So for me, I know that writing a rulebook for me, I'm writing it like I would write a lesson plan. So my education background really does help in that sense. In addition to doing education, I also worked as a technical writer for a while, writing to relay very technical information for companies in lecture form. So they had picked people who are writers and educators to do the same kind of thing, but explaining very dry information to new people who are trying to learn engineering principles. And I found that teachers also did a very good job at that. And it was like writing the world's most boring rule book at that point. So it was actually a step up to write a rule book after after doing both of those jobs, because at least with a game, you're relaying information and you're teaching. So you have, setting something out with information that inevitably is more fun, but still has some very strict rule sets in a way that most people will most easily digest it is the challenge. So I would say if you're looking to write a rule book and you're new, find yourself a teacher to look over it and think of it as a lesson plan. It's actually probably the the best advice I can give any new company. If you know somebody who's a teacher or several somebodies, they'll be able to tell you if it's something that is now learnable, as opposed to a designer who's going to give you strict rule sets, which is factually correct, but maybe not in the best way to relay the information so that people can take in the information and then sit down and play a game.
So, what would you be your comment on those rule books that are endlessly two rule books? You know, you have the learn to play, and then you have your reference book, and then you have the actual rule book. What's your take on that, as well as what would you do in replacement of that? Because that's my biggest pet peeve when I open up a game. I see multiple rule books. I'm like, I just want to get into it. I don't want to read everything. I just want to get into the game.
Well, I like the quick play guides. Like if it's a one page, I'm good. I think a quick play is fine. And I actually appreciate those because sometimes that gets rid of all the nuance of strategy, of that's just getting you sitting down and actually physically opening it, which for some people getting over that hump is a major factor. So I'm okay with the quick play guide. I actually like them a lot. When it gets to be more than that, and I say this a little tongue-in-cheek because Folklore, of course, has the rule book and the storybook, but the storybook is your GM, so you don't want the rule book baked into that as well. It's tricky because you know that the more pages you put into something, the smaller your audience is going to be to play it. So you're accepting a certain amount of limitation of where your game can go for the most part when that happens. If that you're willing to accept that, then you're willing to accept that. But know that that's a fact. The longer the rule book, the smaller your list of people who are going to find it accessible to play.
And how would you, like, what would be a suggestion for you to kind of blend the two together then? Because, I mean, Fantasy Flight is notorious for this. Getting the game book and then the reference book, where it's like information that should already be given.
Come a long way. They had a really bad rep for a long time, I know, but they've come a long way. I will say, so something that we do is our storybook, we tell people, we didn't do a quick reference for Folklore, and we have, like I said, the rulebook and the storybook. We say, start with the storybook. Our storybook's first 2 stories have baked into them, okay, here's the flavor text of the story. Now, here's setup. If you want more information than our summary here, go to page 5 in the rulebook. But if you think that you can just handle it by looking at the summary we've given you here, awesome, go for it. Now here's the next part. So in doing that, making sure that it's a really quick reference and making sure that at least one of them is a jump in and start to play, I think it's okay. But again, it is a very fine balance. If you're going to, I don't think that, again, for certain games, you can't, there's no way to mesh the two, but also understanding that that's lessening the number of people who are going to find it accessible. If you're going to combine the two, so let's take another example. Zpocalypse, our first game, we did the same thing with the second, and I will say it's the same kind of thing. We have one that is a storybook that sets up the scenarios, and it's meant to be you pick it up and you play it, and then you use the rulebook as your reference guide. If you can very clearly call out when you would actually need to pick up the rulebook, and people aren't picking it up in between those times because it's still very unclear, then you've done it successfully. If people are still finding themselves needing to pick up the rulebook constantly, even when it doesn't say, here's a reference if you need more information, then you probably didn't do a very successful job.
That's good to know, from your perspective on that, because I know with the older Fantasy Flights, you're right. They used to be, someone grabbed the reference book, just keep it by your side. We know we're going to it. But you actually said something, and I kind of want to go deeper into this, how you blend story and rules together for Folklore. Yeah. How did you, because isn't the story from somebody else?
So Twinfire is the design company, and it is their brainchild. So all of the lore of Folklore is from them directly. When we add additional stories or support stuff, when I'm doing writing for it, I'm playing in their sandbox. So it's not something like I can be creative, but within a certain rule set of their making. There are certain things that are and aren't acceptable for bending or breaking the rules of the game. So and to that end, Folklore is meant to be something that is easily gotten into, that somebody who wants to try an RPG style game but has found it intimidating or hard, or maybe it's a younger, like families with younger kids who are just starting, or even players who just don't have the time to play anymore. Like, we wanted it to be something that would be a quick sit down, you can play for a couple hours, and then you can put it away again, and you don't have to worry about an ongoing campaign. That was the concept of it. The beauty of it was to keep it simple that way so that it was accessible. The challenge is when you keep playing it, that simplicity, if you don't change it up, becomes monotonous. So you have to break the rules after a while. And so in the stories, we tend to do a lot of, here are the exceptions to the rules we've already established. And that's hard because you're basically writing new rules for tailored to a specific story to reinforce that story. The even bigger challenge is when you find a new rule set that's really good, and then you want to circle back and put it back in the regular rules as a always thing, but you've kind of already established what the baseline rules are. So that's the back and forth of folklore of what makes it challenging, is that sometimes we find things that are just really good and we're like, oh, that would have been great to keep from the beginning, but of course those are already established. So we try to keep them separate and keep exceptions to the rules within the storyline. So for example, in the Dark Tales expansion, our second expansion, we established some pretty extensive dungeon crawl rules that don't exist anywhere except in the Dark Tales expansion. And then, because they were so good, when we did our adventure creation kit, we pulled those out and really talked about what makes a dungeon crawl in folklore, so that if you want to make your own, at least everybody else had the accessibility to create them.
So when you're creating rule sets, I take it you actually have to blind test them, to a group, so
Yep.
they're easily understood. How does that process work? And do you actually write them all down, give them to a group without a designer in play or developer, and see how it goes? Or what's the process there?
Well, to start, it was much more challenging, and but also it wasn't us. It was Twinfire to start. When they brought it to us, it had already been pretty well established, that core game. Now it's gotten quite a bit easier because we have a folklore community who knows the core game and the core rules very well. So now it becomes a matter of saying, hey, if you're interested and you're willing to sign this NDA, here's the Dropbox for the Follow the Spire materials, and we're happy to let you playtest these stories. And because the extra rule sets are baked into those stories and they already know the core rules, it's a little bit easier. So it was a process to get from point A to point B. And that's, I wouldn't say that's, so now we have a shortcut. We do have we are very lucky to have that shortcut. But to start, it was a lot of going to conventions saying, hey, you want to sit down and play this for me? That would be great. I will say that I appreciate groups like, Envoy has their playtesting groups and things at conventions as well that assist in that, and other groups like J.R. Honeycutt's has his playtesting group. So there are established companies that do it. When you're new, that's a lot harder because they still cost money, and I know that as well. One thing that I also appreciate is that I'm happy to exchange playtest for playtest. And so for another thing that I know, you're like, when you're new, you're working really hard on your game, but if you're willing to playtest other people's things and you go to unpubs, that's a really great way to get things playtested as well. And I still do that. I'm not too proud to trade playtest for playtest. To this day.
Mm-hmm. So at what point when you're doing these playtests is it that you know that these rules are final? Because you're always going to get someone who has a different learning style. Not everybody learns, the same exact way. And so it's going to be harder to really say this is the rule set when you still have people saying, wait, I don't get what's going on.
So
yeah, go ahead.
That's important so I always tell people to have a questionnaire and ask people to fill out a questionnaire. As weird as, uncomfortable some people feel like that's an extra step that most people don't want to do, I found quite the opposite, that most people really appreciate it. Because if they want to playtest your game, then they actually typically are somebody who is willing to spend time writing. And I've actually found some of the most amazing playtesters because of it, who I've asked to do that and have given me pages, like a small dissertation on my games. Like very well thought out. Here's how it's broken. Here are my 3 ways of suggesting how you fix it. Here are the pros and cons to each of those 3 ways. Like, you find the people who are absolutely enthused to do that. And then there are some who will say no, but they're a very small minority. So when I was first starting, I was uncomfortable asking, but I've learned over time that it's actually much preferable. And for not just because you find that people are willing to do it, but it also gives you that distance from the feedback of the person. They're more willing to be honest with you if they're writing it on paper where they can't see your feelings being hurt when they say something that is, even if it's constructive, a criticism. And you can sit in the privacy of your own home and get upset and argue with a piece of paper. And then if you see 15 of the same pieces of paper saying the same thing, realize that perhaps there's a valid point. And really, as much as you argue with a piece of paper, it's not going to argue back.
Right.
So for me, it was always a very helpful thing. I could cry, I could yell, I could be like, you're crazy. But if I saw it 15 times, I could do it without looking foolish in front of other people. And then I could make those changes. I will say that one thing that I do at the beginning of a questionnaire is ask, what style games do you prefer to play? Because if somebody tells me they prefer to play heavy Euros and then they play folklore, I'm going to take all of their criticism with a grain of salt. It's not their style of game that they're going to enjoy playing in the first place. So, if they're willing to do it, I'm not going to say, no, you can't play test my game. But I do know that if they're saying they don't particularly enjoy RPG style games, that maybe their feedback won't be as helpful because they're not the audience I'm gearing the game to in the first place. That doesn't mean they might not have a helpful suggestion, and if they're a willing participant, then I am happy to have them. But it also does help me in weighing the weight of their feedback.
Right. All right, so we're going to read a few comments real quick before we continue on. One that actually relates to just what you said was from Bryn Smith. He said exactly, they are much for willing to criticize, if not to your face.
Correct.
So there's that. Jaron has 2 comments. He says thumbs up for quick plays. He's with you on that. As well as Diana and I are always available for playtesting. So,
the Woodberries. They're the best.
Yep. And Michael Petrie says Julie rocks.
Thank you.
All right, so going back to the rule sets. So actually, with this need for inclusion that's been happening, and it's a great push for, in your rule sets, how do you deal with pronouns? Is it him, her, or do you use something more inclusive?
So, yeah, we kind of talked about this. For the most part, folklore puts everything as if you are, I guess, in that second person. So you or we. You are playing folklore, so you will need to. So it's talking to the player and trying to put them in the moment. Or the character. So you are playing the character, and so there's not really a he or she. In previous games that we've done, we usually alternated when we were giving examples, and we stuck with the color of the token. So red player chooses to move diagonally, she moves 3 spaces, and then yellow player is now able to attack her, he attacks with a specific type of card. As soon as Webster's Dictionary said that they was gender neutral, if it was good enough for the dictionary, it was good enough for us, and we've kind of switched over to that for most of our games at this point.
All right, so let's move on to Kickstarter, because you've actually worked on the Folklore Kickstarter page, and it is a great page. Like I said, I've actually showed it off to Weta. She's excited about that.
I can't believe you did that. I'm a little.
So, one of the questions I had for Kickstarter, starting from the beginning, is the hook. It's important to have a hook to actually draw in your audience. What are some important words or phrases that you guys decided to use to get people to continue reading?
Well, it's RPG style, tabletop board game, dark gothic fantasy, and then miniatures. You want people to know what they're getting right away, and you want it to be as succinct as possible. The next thing that I do is I try to make sure that there's a little bit of flavor in there so that you really do get a feeling. So our about is as short as I could make it, with getting as much detail as I could about what the game's about. And that it's for both returning backers and new backers. Or returning, I shouldn't even say returning backers, just people who have previously owned the game and new backers alike, that there's levels for both. So I wanted to make sure that people knew that it wasn't just an exclusive club, but also that if you were somebody who's already supported us, there are levels for that as well. And then right after that, making sure we always like to have, it's a narrative driven game. I want an example of what style of narration you're getting, so that there's that first paragraph that puts you in the story, and it's you're walking down the streets. And it gives you this just a little snapshot of walking through the town and knowing that danger, you're on a mission already, you're on a quest to find something, because that's what the game is. It's a storytelling game where you're being given the story as the story provides you that GM kind of moment. So we wanted people to have that feel. So for us, that's the hook of folklore, is the story is its hook. That's the biggest, what sets it apart in that genre.
So for folklore, that's great, but what about, like, is there a kind of a standard format that you use or that you've developed in giving information or prioritizing information to the backer? Like, we can say a preview video section is going to be so much further less than a how to play section or game components. And then what in your mind is a kind of standard of that?
Okay, so whenever you're in sales, they tell you to have that, the elevator pitch, your 5-second pitch, your 30-second pitch, your 5-minute pitch, and then after that, you can have the luxury of taking your time and doing a lot more fuller explanation. That is exactly how a Kickstarter is already. They're trying to set it up to be that for you in the first place. They give you that. What is that? 60 characters max, or 100? I'm not going to remember right now. 120 characters, whatever that first blurb is. That's your 5-second pitch. Get as much detailed information as you can about the game in that one thing, and then the about is your 30-second pitch. Again, as short as possible, as much information as possible about what makes your game special, what makes the level special, who is this for, why would somebody want to play it, what are the stats on it. So that, because many people, that's all they're going to look at is that box on their screen at the top of it, and they're not going to scroll down past that. So as much as you can give them there is super important, while still making it sound exciting. And I don't know if I have a formula per se for that. I tend to bullet point all the features, and then I say which of these features actually sound interesting, the most interesting to me, whether or not they are in actuality the most interesting. What are the ones that sound the most interesting to me, and make sure that people know that they are interesting and why, as succinctly as possible.
So you know, with your background as a teacher and you know your wordsmithing ability of getting people to be hooked by your descriptions, there's an argument that I want you to give your opinion on that I have had with other people. The importance of a header video. Do you think it's important in a Kickstarter page or no? The counter argument is it's not because all it can do is hurt you. Do you believe that?
Hurt me in what way?
Exactly. It will turn backers off and get them not to continue on reading the words that you want them to see.
Okay, well, interesting. I I think people are going to do at a glance whether you withhold that or not, because that's human nature. It's also what, as a society, we've been trained to do. We're trained to listen to the soundbite. We're trained to look at the clickbait. Recently, there was something on Facebook. There was a post. Oh, I wish I had saved it too, because it was so accurate. It said, "This is the thing you're looking at first. Second is this. Third is this. Lastly is this." And it was what was supposed to be on the picture, the caption underneath it, the comment above it based on like who was sending it. And it showed very specifically where our eye is drawn in a Facebook post. We are trained, we are programmed to look at specific things in specific order. And you can say that you're going to buck the system, but it's all of society has geared it towards a specific way. So if you're going to try to buck the system, I don't think that's the way to do it. I don't think that's where you should make your stand. I think maybe creatively how you use it, what your message is about your Kickstarter, what type of game and how it's being played is so much better, is a much better way to stand apart than not trying, thinking that somebody is going to scroll down because you withhold a blurb at the top. They're not. They're either going to be intrigued by what you say or not. And not saying anything is going to intrigue them further. I don't believe that's the case.
Thank you for your response there. My next question actually has to do with campaigns that are too wordy. Yeah, and I'm sure you guys have all seen those. That's the campaign where you have the image up top, you have the about us, and then all of a sudden it's just pages upon pages of people telling you about the game instead of showing you. What do you think is a good combination between given information and visual information?
It's hard, though. I get it, because it's somebody who wants to write. I want to write, and and I've gotten, I have some very talented people that I work with who care about me very much and care about our company very much, who are willing to give me the tough love and be like, "No, Julie, no." So I feel for all those people who want to write all the words, because I'm one of them. But yeah, so for me, I'll if I feel like I need to write it, I'll write it, and then I'll save it, and I'll say, okay, put that now, say it in half that time, and I'll cut it down to half, and then I'll look at it again, I'll go, okay, now cut it down to half. And that's what I do. I used to cry when I did it. I won't lie. I would cry as I edited myself. I don't anymore. I have learned that being succinct with my words can also be very impactful. Uh, but it took a while to get to that place. And because you're so excited about your own project, it really is hard not to just gush about something that you're so excited about. Um, so, so I have a lot of empathy. However, having empathy doesn't mean that it's still okay to do it, because it does the opposite. To your point, it does the opposite of what it is intending to do. You're intending to convey your excitement, your enthusiasm, your joy at this thing that you've created, and instead you're getting the glazed over eyes. So I guess if people could think about it as when others show their baby pictures nonstop, or pictures of their vacation, and there's like a stack, like I mean, this is dating me obviously because we don't really take photos and make prints of them anymore. But what, like, when you have that wall of vacation pictures or baby pictures, and like the first five are cute and then your eyes start to glaze over, it's the same. Like, this is your baby. Pick the five cutest pictures and go with that. So same thing with your words. This is your baby. Give me the five key points, and then make sure you're showing me a lot of the details so that I can draw the conclusions myself. Let the backer, because you want them to be a backer, meet you halfway. Don't keep reaching out to them, because that's just pushing them away. Let them engage with you and draw them in and want to ask for more and know more.
So Mr. Woodbury just said he's always amazed how much you pack into a rumors card, mini stories, and that stand on their own. I don't know what that comment.
So I guess that's, I see what the tie-in is. It's slightly larger than a poker-sized playing card, double-sided. That is a side quest that you end up having to do a lot of activity for to get a reward. So they're side quests, and we managed to do a setup that's flavor text, some bonus rule sets. Usually there's a map, and then a conclusion of what happens once you've succeeded, in a very small, succinct period of space, very specifically for the people who don't have time to play a full story, or just like having side quests to do while they're doing their stories. And the trick of it's the same kind of principle. We are trying to condense down a full gaming experience to the most concentrated amount possible.
All right. So going back to what you were talking about, making things succinct and, cutting things down, when has words ever failed you or gone terribly wrong because you went too succinct?
That's a great question. I'm at that point where that is the fault that I sometimes have, because I've gotten so economical with my words. So currently on the folklore campaign, we did a lot of examining in specific detail, the expansion. But there's a lot of people saying, well, I'm confused about what comes at what level, because you don't have full layouts of everything, and so I'm finding it confusing. So I just today put up, not on the page itself, but a link, so that it didn't cause that huge sprawl that you get, that I also find overwhelming. So I was trying to avoid that and not overwhelm people with, here's everything that comes in every box. But there are people who are now confused because they don't know what comes in every box. So it's a link to our website that you can click through and see the different boxes and see what's inside them, so that people have that opportunity, but it isn't overwhelming them on the Kickstarter page. So yes, there is a balance there.
And talking about small spaces, actually, and being concise and succinct, when it comes to actually the pledge levels, there's only so much information you can give there. But I don't know if you have, but I know I have seen where you go to a pledge and then all of a sudden it's like, here again, I'm reading a short story. Like, how do you divulge that information without, again, being too wordy?
Ooh. Yeah, I think the pledge levels are a challenge, especially when you have to set them on the side of the campaign. Um, and then as you change and augment things, people are like, "Well, wait, it's not on the list. Is it there?" That's why we have our visual panels below, and that why I find them to be a useful tool, so that you can try to show, no, this is just go look at the pictures. Sometimes pictures work better than the words. And thank goodness for Zach, because that is not my forte.
So, for you, if I were to ask, what advice would you give first-time creators when it comes to rules as well as Kickstarter pages that you had difficulty in, that is something you learned over time?
So the hardest lesson is how to respond to the backers, I think. Um, you can feel personally attacked sometimes when people are so passionate about your game and then telling you you're doing it wrong. And it's very hard to take a step back and remember these are people who, for the most part, overwhelmingly, with a few rare exceptions, want you to succeed. They may not always agree with you of what your vision is, and that's okay. But to respond to them with patience and compassion and understanding and a modicum of self-censorship is something that's taken time for me to learn.
And now, yeah, continue.
So, and I will say this campaign in particular, it's shown that over the years, the campaigns have changed because we have this wonderful folklore community now, whereas the first two, I felt like I was doing a lot of the responding on my own. And now, because we have people who have been playing for a couple years, I will go in and try to find questions to answer, and they've all been answered for me. And it's very much appreciated, because I do understand when a lot of people will say, well, of course you're going to respond in a positive way. You're one of the game creators. You have, of course you're going to stay positive and be and say that it's great. Whereas when you have somebody who's another backer who plays the game, it's a little bit different when they're like, no, it's going to be great. and that's fantastic, but that's also very hard to do when it's a new game and when you have a group of people who is super excited to see the vision as they envision it be created versus how necessarily you envision it being created. There's a bit of a disconnect, and that's a challenge.
Going back to your first one that you said, I want to actually kind of continue on that, is because we've become more of a society of ingesting visual content versus written as much, it's so much easier to misunderstand what someone has typed because you inject your own personality into it. Mm-hmm. So how do you use words in your benefit to make sure there's no way that they can inject that you're trying to respond in a negative way? Because I know, like, key phrases such as, hey, I think you misunderstood. Whoa, whoa, whoa. It's like, now you're putting it on me.
Right. Right. So one of the things they teach you as a teacher, and anybody who's, I feel like teachers have a skill set of this, often nurses, a lot of first responders who are trained to de-escalate when there's high tension. tend to get training, very specific training. And for me, one of the things that it entailed was I hear you saying this. It makes me think that this is what you mean. This makes me feel this way. This is how I would like to respond to it. Now, I don't do all those steps out loud, but I go through that exercise in my head and see where I think there might be a disconnect on either of our parts. So for me, that's how I end up doing a lot of when there's a high tension, where I'll say, can you clarify this for me? I think what you're saying, or I think what you're telling me is this, and see if it's a miscommunication type of thing. That's typically a lot of how I take off it from them, is that I heard it a certain way. Is this what they were? And that gives them the leeway to say, well, what I heard was this. It doesn't always work, obviously, but I try to, use a lot of de-escalating rather than putting the impetus on them. And for me, it's also a matter of very pointedly ignoring any kind of insults, whether passive-aggressive or openly aggressive, and only looking for the question. If there's a question embedded in anything of their statement, I'm focusing on responding to that question, and I'm ignoring everything else. Because it doesn't serve me to address a negativity, because it could be something that, like you said, sometimes when you write versus when you say it, you hear it in your head very differently than how it is written. And so that's not just how I write, that's how, as I'm reading it, if I choose to focus on a negative thing, then all I'm going to do is focus on that. If I focus on the question and I answer the question, then really that is my purpose as somebody who's trying to promote my Kickstarter. My purpose is not to be a social educator about it, or etiquette provider. It's not. That's not what I do. So if in person that were to be the case, I might say, hey, do you maybe want to step back and rephrase that? I might not. I might just say, here's the answer to your question. Mm-hmm. Are you interested in purchasing this game or not?
I mean, that's really all you can ask at that point, I guess.
Right. If somebody wants to engage in a debate about why I am or am not making choices I am about the game, I'm happy to have that. Like, a debate about something is fine. I'm not going to engage in name calling ever. It doesn't serve purpose in my mind.
Right.
So,
and I think that's a great point, especially with trolls. You're gonna get them. No matter who you are, what you are putting out there, they're gonna happen. And Jewel, you make a very valid point. If it's not a debate, or it's not something you can answer, there's no reason for you to ever respond.
Correct.
Because not only from your standpoint, you're just giving them more fuel to go and be negative.
Correct. And honestly, also, that is true. I also they don't know me any more than I know them. I don't know what's going on in their lives. It could be if somebody is very angry at me online, I am typically, unless I know them personally, I know that really that anger has nothing to do with me personally. I might be right now the focus of it because of, my game happened to be there. But really, whatever's going on in their life, there must be something going on that's making their life a challenge. And that has really nothing to do with me, and therefore it has nothing to do with me. So I'm just going to answer their question about the game.
All right, so the last follow-up of the question, so what about for rule books? What would be the takeaway there? Sorry, we went on a little tangent.
Got a little deep, yeah.
All right.
Rule books. Okay, what was the question about the rule books?
What advice would you give to a new publisher?
If you're writing your own rule book, have somebody else look at it. If you're the designer, have somebody else rewrite it. If I think we've covered a lot of it, give it to somebody and let them blind play it. Give it to, there are some amazing, wonderful, extremely talented people in the industry who are willing to do it if you can afford them. If you can't, like I said, find yourself a teacher. Find yourself an educator who writes a lot of lesson plans, and go from there. And as much as you may believe that the way you've laid it out is the perfect way to explain your game, if people don't understand it and they're telling you they don't understand it, it's not the perfect way. It's not. And you want people to be able to understand your game.
Right. Well, Julie, thank you so much for taking the time to do this with me. They're on Kickstarter right now, Folklore, The Fall of the Spire. They have 12 days left, 14 days left. I almost discounted you 2 days. 14 days left. They're already backed over 1,000%. So make sure to check out the Kickstarter now. Julie, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
All right, guys, my name is Marco. That was Julie. This is the Design Room on wordsmithing for new developers and publishers who have questions on how to form rulebooks, as well as best information given for how to get your Kickstarter where it's more concise and to the point. Anyway, my name is Marco. It was a pleasure. You guys have a great night.